Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today on Gamemaker for Beginners, we're going to be taking a look at creating your own functions. So we're going to be diving into scripts and how scripts work, and then also what you can do with them. So the first question that I want to answer is, why would you create your own functions? So there's actually quite a few things that you can do with your own functions. You can legitimately just grab a bunch of code and just copy and paste it into a function. And then instead of having all of that code exist inside of like a step event or something, you can just call that function and then all of that code will execute just like normal. I also create functions for doing basic things that I need to do all the time. So like every single time that I'm going to be drawing text to the screen, I'm also going to be setting like my horizontal alignment for the text and the vertical alignment for the text and the font and the color and all this stuff. And instead of going, draw set H line, draw set V align, draw set font, draw set color, like every single time that I am going to be drawing some text to the screen, I can instead just create a function called draw settings, and I can go ahead and do all of that there. And then you can also create functions that are going to figure out information and then return that information to you. I'm sure that there's a lot more things that you can be doing with functions, and honestly, if you think of more things to do with functions, you can go ahead and comment those down below, and I will absolutely make a supplementary video on this video for more things you can do with functions. Those are the three things that I commonly use functions for. And because of that, that's what we're going to be dealing with today. So quickly, just to get into things, I have my O player here, and it's got a couple events. It's got its create event, where I am just figuring out my variables for doing simple top-down movement. And then I also have my step event here where I am doing that movement. I'm getting my player inputs. I'm figuring out the direction that I want to be moving in. I'm figuring out how far on the X and Y axis I want to move that far in that direction. I'm doing some simple collision checks for colliding with the walls. And then I am using a while loop to make sure that my collision checks are pixel perfect. Finally, I am figuring out whether or not any key is being pressed. And if any key is being pressed, I'm committing to my movement. And then if I run this right now, you're going to see I'm able to move around. Oh, I forgot a very simple thing. HSP equals 0 and VSP equals 0. Alright. I'm able to collide with the walls. And everything is looking good and smart and prim and proper. And we are going to take this project and we are going to use it to create some functions. So let's get into creating functions. So the first type of function we're going to be creating is we are just going to be replacing code with functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to scripts. I'm going to create a script, and I am actually going to name this script player functions. And scripts have actually changed in the last few years. It used to be that a script was a function. Now a script is more of a folder in which to hold functions. So for example, I'm going to create a function here. And to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to type the word function. And that's going to let Gamemaker know that this is not code that should be executed at any given point in time, but it is rather a function that we are creating that we are going to be able to call later to use. And I'm just going to call this get player input. So this has now created an empty function called getPlayerInput. I've told Gamemaker it is a function. I have given this function a name called getPlayerInput. And then these two brackets right here are essentially what creates the function. And then I'm going to put these squiggly brackets, and in between these squiggly brackets is where we can actually place the function. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go here, and I'm going to delete my input. And then I'm going to paste it here. So I now have a function that is going to assign these variables based on what the player is pressing for keys. So I'm just going to take these variables I've created in my create event, and I'm going to assign them a true or false value based on whether or not these keys are being pressed. But I'm only doing that inside of this function. And as you can see, I am no longer getting my input here. So if I were to run this now, I can't move. I can hit all the keys I want, and I can no longer move. And that is because all of my movement is being calculated based on those booleans. So what I can do here is I can just say get player input, and it actually gets created here, and I can just select that. And now at the beginning of every step, this function is being called, which will execute this code. So if I run this now, you're going to see that I can move. But let's take this a step further. Let's grab all this next. Let's go to player functions. Let's collapse this function to keep this nice and tidy. And let's create a new function. And let's call it player movement. And let's paste. And then, just to clean this up, let's tab all this out. So here we have all of my player movement. And I can go ahead and I can actually just copy this, go to my player event, so go to my step event and my player object, and let's paste that function there. And you're going to see that nothing's going to change, because I'm still executing all that same code. The only difference is that instead of doing it all in the step event, I've created functions that handles it all for me. And again, let's just take this one step further. So let's create a new function, and let's call it player collisions. And honestly, this is something that I always do. I always just put my collisions inside of a custom function, and it's a core process of how I code when I am coding for my own projects outside of tutorials. And let's go into my player movement function here, and let's just grab my collision checks, and let's get rid of those. Let's place them here. So now I have my collision checks inside of a function, and then I can go into this function here, which is my player movement, and I'm just going to go player collisions. And then because in my step event, I am calling this function that I've created, and inside of this function that I've created, I am calling this function that I've created, it's going to all work the same. So if I run this now, as you can see, I am able to, well, nothing's changed. And that's the important part. And actually, let's go one step further. Let's create one more function. And let's just call it player step event. And let's go get player input. And let's go player movement. And then I can go here and I can delete both of these. And I can just go player step event. and nothing has changed. So if I've lost you during that process, let's just break down what I've done and let's talk about it a little bit. So I have done a very simple just replacing code with functions. That's all I've done is I've just, instead of executing all of my code in my window here, I have compressed my code into functions, and then instead of running all of that code, I am instead just running the functions. And then on top of that, I created a function that runs my functions. So that's one of the most basic uses of your own functions is you can use them to just execute code. Calling this function, all that's going to do is just cause this code to run, which is just going to create the ability to just organize and compress my code into just a simpler, easier way to do things, right? Like, instead of looking at this and being like, okay, so what am I doing here? I've taken booleans and I've attached them to keyboard checks, and I'd be like, okay, so that must mean that I'm getting player input, right? And I have to deduce that. And I can deduce that pretty quickly. It's pretty obvious what this line of code is doing, but by just reading the function, I know exactly what it's doing, right? So if I go to, just go to my player step event right here, get player input, and I'm like, okay, that's where you get the player input. And that is just a very basic, easy way to use functions, is to just use them to replace code. But there is a lot more that we can do with functions. So let's actually create one more script here. And this one, I'm just going to call utility. And this is actually also something that I do in all of my projects, as I will have a script, I will label it utility, and I will use it to just put general use functions that I'm going to be using quite a bit that aren't attached to any specific object. And actually, before we get much farther into this, let's create a font. I'm just going to call this FNT font. And I'm going to use my Born to be Sporty. I'm going to enable SDF. I'm going to increase its size to be like 21. And then I'm going to go to my O player, and I am going to add a new event. And it's going to be the Draw GUI event. And I'm going to draw text at display get GUI width divided by 2 at Y1 200. And I'm going to say example text. I don't really like where that is on the Y, so I'm just going to go Y50. So now we have this text up here, and I'm honestly not a fan of that. I want it to be a different font. So instead, I'm going to go draw set font, and the font is going to be FNT font. So I'm going to run this again. There we go. It's in the right font now. But it's not exactly dead center, is it? Like, the E is at roughly center, and then it's being drawn to the right. So then the actual text itself is just a little bit off center. So let's fix that. Let's go draw set H line, font align. I think it's center. There we go. That's looking a lot more center. Then if I'm going to set my horizontal align, I also want to set my vertical alignment. So I'm going to go draw, set, V align, FA middle. Oh, but I kind of want it to be yellow. So let's go draw, set, color, C, yellow. Perfect. Okay, so now every single time that I want to draw some text to the screen, I'm going to have to tell it what font to use, how to horizontally align it, how to vertically align it, and what color. That sounds like a hassle. Sounds like a real hassle. I'm going to put this in a function. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to go to my utility. I'm going to go function, text settings. Perfect. So now I can go here, and I have all of this happening inside of this function. So now I just have to call that function. Text settings. Run this now. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. But what if I want to change things? What if I want to use a different font? What if I want to use a different color? So it's simple, right? Simple. So I'm actually going to just go right here inside of these two brackets. You can tell it to ask for arguments. So let's ask for the color. So here I can now just say color. And then every time that you call this function, you're going to need to provide this argument, and it's going to put this value in there. So I can actually go to here, and instead I want it to be red. Now it's red. Perfect. Cool. But just to make this a little bit smarter here, let's change the color and let's make the H align a variable, the V align a variable, and let's make the font a variable. So now I can just replace this with font, replace this with H align, and replace this with V align. So now I've created a function, and I have told Gamemaker that this function is going to require 4 different arguments. And then I am going to put these arguments inside of the functions I'm calling here, and I'm going to be using these arguments to set all my text. So now when I go to my player event, just telling it the color is not going to be enough. Now I need to tell it to put it in the center for my horizontal alignment, in my middle for my vertical alignment, and to use FNT font. And there we have it, working beautifully. But I think we can smarten this up a little bit more. I think there's more that we can do that is going to make this just run a little bit better. Like, for example, I only really have the one font, and I might introduce another font later, but 99% of my text is going to be displayed in this one font. So do I really need to have this here? Like, if I only have the one font, then I can just get rid of this argument and I can just say that, FNT font. Because I only have one font. Like, why does that matter? But what if I decide later on that I have a big boss enemy or something that is going to use a different font just to look a little more menacing? But I don't want to have to tell it what font to use every single time if 99% of the time I'm going to be using this font. And only that one time am I going to be using a different font. So what's a good way that we can do this? So it's actually, rather simple. I'm going to keep font in here. And up here, I'm still going to ask for a font. The only difference is I'm actually going to give the font a default value of FNT font. And what this is going to do is this is going to turn it into an optional argument. So when I go here, I can delete this. And if you look way down here at the bottom, I don't know how well you can see that on your monitors, but it's got the function that I've created, and it's telling me all of the different arguments that I need to provide. But this font at the end here, it's in square brackets, almost as if it's part of an array. That tells me that it's an optional, an optional argument. I actually don't need to provide that argument, and it will still run fine. Like, without that argument, it runs absolutely fine. But then if I want to, let's just create another font here. And I'm going to call this FNT alt font. And I'm going to give it something crazy. I'm going to give it the ethnocentric font. I'm going to increase its size just a little bit here. I'm going to enable the SDF. I'm going to go back to my player event, and without the font argument, nothing's going to change. It's going to look exactly the same. But I'm going to give it the optional argument, and I'm going to change the font. As you can see, my font has changed. But there's honestly more that I can do with this. I'm going to go back here, and my V-align isn't really going to change ever. So I'm just going to make this FA middle. My H-line's probably never really going to change either, so I'm going to make this FA center. So now the only thing that I really need to provide now is my color. So I can actually get rid of all this, and it's going to draw everything the exact same way. It's going to use my original font of FNT font, and it's going to draw it in red. You see, there it is, working perfectly. But also, my color 9 times out of 10 is just going to be white. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this white, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to get rid of this. And now I am legitimately just calling this function. And if you look down here, everything now is in those square brackets. They are all optional arguments. So if I just run this now, there it is, in white, in font, properly aligned, everything. Then if I just decide that it's going to be blue, I just go see blue. There it is, now it's blue. And I can provide it up to 4 arguments, and it's going to change the text as I see fit based on this function that I've created here. And this is how you can create functions that are going to do a menial task for you that you will probably need to do a lot. I always create this exact script. This is a very common function that I create in all of my projects because every single time, without fail, every single time that I draw text to my screen, I'm going to set my settings and make sure that I am drawing it properly. And why would I go through the process of typing all of this out every single freaking time that I want to draw some text when I can just create a function that's going to give me the default settings that I'm going to want 90% of the time with the ability to change it. And then you can also put these arguments in order. So like the most common thing that I'm going to be changing is likely the color. In this situation, I'm not going to be changing my horizontal alignment and vertical alignment very often. So I can actually just change the order here. And I'm just going to go font equals FNT font. And now I can change my color and my font without having to touch these variables. Whereas before, when my font was at the end, in order to change my font, I would have to provide these arguments. Now I don't have to. Now I can just change the color and then change the font. And then in a weird situation, if I do decide that I want to change the way that my text is aligned, I can go ahead and do that with my final 2 arguments. And that's like the basics of how you can create a function that is going to have arguments, and also how to create them with optional arguments. So to create arguments is really simple. Like when you create a function, and you just have, function example. Right? So here's the basics of creating a function. I've told Gamemaker that it is a function, and this function is called example. Any arguments that I need to provide to this function, I can just list them right here inside of these brackets. And that's going to create local variables that exist inside of the function that I can reference inside of the function. So like this variable right here does not exist outside of text settings. But it does exist inside of text settings, which gives me the ability to use it here. And yeah, that's just the basics of just creating a utility function that is going to give you the ability to perform a task for you. Just automate a very basic standard task that is going to save you a ton of writing in the future. So there's one more type of function that I want to show you guys, and it's going to have to do with the word return. So return is really cool, right? So if you're watching my previous videos on functions, you would know that place meeting is a Boolean function, which means that it is going to return either a true or a false. And that is what return does. So like if I create a function, create a variable, call it found, and I have it equal place meeting, what's going to happen is that place meeting is going to determine whether its conditions have rendered a true or a false, and it is going to return that value and place it into found. Like same thing with like if I were to go instance place, which is another function that I've shown you guys in my my collision functions series. So instance place is going to return the ID of an instance. You're going to give it an X coordinate and a Y coordinate and an object to look for. And if it finds an instance of that object at that coordinate, it is going to grab the ID of that instance and it's going to return it into the variable found. And it's going to store that value there. But if it doesn't find an instance of that object in that location, it is going to return no one and it is going to store that in found. And that is what return does. It's going to just return a value outside of the function so that you can use that function to, gain some information. So let's create a function that's going to do this. So let's create a function called distance to wall. And we're going to use a function that's going to do exactly this. It is going to tell us how far we are from our nearest wall. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the ID of the nearest wall. So I'm going to create a local variable and I'm going to call it nearest wall. And I'm going to call the function instance nearest to my current X and Y position and O wall. So I have called instance nearest, which is going to just find the closest instance of O wall, and it is going to grab the ID of that instance and store it inside of this local variable. I am now going to create a new local variable, and I'm just going to call it distance, and it is just going to equal point distance x, y, nearest wall dot x and nearest wall dot y. So now I am going to figure out how much distance in pixels exists between my current position and the X and Y position of the closest wall, and I am able to reference its X and Y position here because I know the ID of that instance is stored inside of this variable because I have used this function to get its ID, and then I'm going to be comparing those two coordinates to figure out the distance between them, and then when this function returns that distance, I'm going to store it inside of this variable. And then finally, I'm just going to say return distance. So now, once I've figured all of this information out, this function is going to return the distance. So I can actually go to my OPlayer events here. And I'm going to go var wall distance equals distance to wall. And I know that this function here is going to return the distance between the player and the nearest wall. And then right here, I am just going to type that to the screen. So the nearest wall is 339.3 pixels away. If I move down, that number is going to decrease. And then I can move towards this wall. And it's always going to tell me exactly how far away I am from my nearest wall. And that is because I have figured out that information, I've calculated that distance, and then I have returned it to outside of the function so that I can call that function to get that information. And that is just a good example of how you can use the keyword return to figure out some kind of information and then return it. Then I can even create a function. I'm just going to call it space pressed and create a local variable. I'm going to call it space, and it is going to equal keyboard check vk space. And then I'm going to say if space return true, else return false. So now I'm figuring out whether or not the space bar is pressed. I'm creating a local variable and I'm seeing whether or not I am pressing the space bar. If this is true, I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. So, space equals space pressed, and here space. I'm going to run this. It's just going to say 0. I'm not pressing space. Press space, 1. Release space, 0. Press space, 1. Release space, 0. This probably isn't the best way to do this. I can instead just be like, and now it's just going to return true or false based on whether or not I'm pressing the spacebar. Works the exact same. Remember, 1 is true, 0 is false. But yeah, that's really a quick crash course on how you can be creating your own functions to do anything that you really want to do. I create a lot of functions, and then I always sort it into folders that I call scripts. Well, Gamemaker calls them scripts. Like I said, scripts have changed. It used to be that a script was a function, and you would actually have to create folders of scripts. Now, you can just create a script, treat the script as a folder, and then you can go ahead and create multiple functions inside of a script. So yeah, that's really all that I have for you guys today. Like I said, I just wanted to give you guys a quick crash course on how to write your own functions and why you would write your own functions. If you have any questions about what I have done today, go ahead and comment those down below. If there are uses for functions that I did not cover today, please comment those down below. Writing your own functions and scripts have a ton of use cases, and there is no way that I covered just even the basics of what those use cases are. You can do absolutely anything with a script. But if there is anything about scripting that you think is blatant or important that I have just incredibly missed, please let me know. If there is anything about scripting and writing your own functions that I didn't cover that you were just curious about, again, please just let me know. If you are not sure about something that I have done today, again, let me know. I will go out of my way and I will help you understand, and I will do my best to increase your understanding so that you are able to create better projects. Other than that, just, like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys are having a good one, and peace out.